welcome back to the Now Morning Show, where we are continuing conversations in observance of International Men's Day, with men making up about 54% of Trinidad and Tobago's labor force and 50% of the unemployed. We are aptly talking to the critical role of men in modern organizations, thanks to Mr. Richard Solomon, the Managing Director of Development Consulting Center Limited. No stranger to the Now Morning Show. Good morning. And
Good
welcome.
morning to you.
Happy International Men's Day.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for continuing conversations that give us some sort of direction. Those statistics are a great place to start.
Yeah.
Because with 54% of the labor force, in layman's, what does that mean? What does that translate to?
Well, you have more men providing productive labor in that sense, paid labor, maybe we should say that way,
Right.
paid labor than women in the workplace. And that may have a lot to do with the traditional roles that women take versus the ones that men tend to take.
Right,
Yeah.
not necessarily a negative or positive,
No,
just
no.
this is what it is.
This is what it is, yeah.
Unemployment, however, at 50%, we're literally at the middle mark. These statistics were according to what last research are we looking at?
That is the last data we have coming out of the CSO. So that would have been for Q2 of this year. They tend to lag a little behind, yeah.
We do. But that translates into opportunities. We want equality. We want to make sure, as you were saying all through the show, that men have a safe space to
Yeah.
function effectively. But how does that impact the workplace? And what sort of dynamic does that create in the workplace?
I think the first thing we have to accept is that men are different to women. And I mean, that might sound obvious, but, you know, we look at these two beings, male and female, and we think, well, they are of the same species, and they are, but there's quite a bit of difference in terms of base chemicals, in terms of neurological functioning. There's quite a bit of difference, and therefore men show up differently in the workplace.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily a bad thing. It should not be seen as a bad thing.
Agreed.
But because of the ways that some men show up, it can be deemed as a bad thing.
You know, it's interesting that you just mentioned that with the way that men show up, because the first thing that came to my mind is automatically corporate.
Right.
And the fact that many times we do see women assimilate some tendencies that, that men are genetically predisposed to.
Right.
Let's be realistic about it as well. And it begs the question, just pinning off of what Ayanka said about the equality and the fact that are men and women treated equally in the workplace? And should they be as well?
Right.
I think in Trinidad and Tobago, well, maybe I should start with this. I believe if you and I do the same job, competence and performance being the same, we should be paid the same. That's easy. That part shouldn't be too difficult. The disparity, I believe, in Trinidad and Tobago is more along the lines of industry type, that males and females dominate. I said more, not only, but more. So if you stereotypically you went into the gas and oil sector, you will find a lot more men.
Yes.
It's not that women can't do those jobs, but in some cases they are simply not best suited. And in more cases, they opt not to.
Right.
We have to take that into consideration, you know. So the issue of equality as it relates to pay and treatment, same job, same work, it should be the same. However, there are some real differences in terms of the types of work that men tend to dominate versus women, and therefore we can't expect the same treatment.
That's a valid point. Expecting the same treatment is another conversation for another day. But in terms of the difference of how they show up, going back to that term, showing up in organizations, are we talking about management level throughout the industry, throughout the companies rather? Let's describe a little bit that showing up.
Well, let's separate the showing up. I believe that the tendency of males to be more competitive, less risk averse, certainly driven by this thing called testosterone, causes men to fight to a greater degree. And I use the word fight in quotes because I don't mean it negatively necessarily. And therefore, we do see more men in senior managerial roles. That is shifting to some degree, and in some places, that has actually flipped. So that's one thing. The other thing, though, is that the way a man comports himself in the workplace is different. So we're still talking about showing up. Men tend to show up more competitive, but also more aggressive, more confrontational. That is not always a bad thing. It can be a good thing if used well. Just like competitiveness and risk aversion, which is lower for men, can also be a good thing. So there's also that in terms of the showing up that is a little bit different, or can be a lot different.
Not different. A lot different. And then in terms of, well, extending on that, modern organizations then, do they show an appreciation for that difference?
Right. So this one is, I have to handle this a little gently. We talk about triple bottom line accounting, people, planet, profit. And we've seen over the years that there's a greater focus on the experience that people have, how people feel in the workplace. It seems that women have a greater tendency to lean to that concern for how people feel in the workplace. Men tend to be more confrontational. And quite honestly, do apply a lot more tough love, if you want, workplace, at home, similarly.
Generally.
Is that a bad thing? Well, I don't know. I don't see it necessarily as a bad thing. Yes, we have to take care of people, but we also have to take care of the health of this thing called the organization.
Derivatives. Yeah.
And if the organization is in the red, we're all in trouble, regardless of how we feel. You know, so there has to be that. I mean, we could look at the home as well. Sure, we need to care for people, but we also need to have discipline. Both need to exist. And I think if we were to see it from that perspective, that these two different ways of being are actually essential for our continued survival and growth as an organization, it probably would be a little bit more helpful than going to, well, is this bad or is this good?
Right.
Yeah, the difference is necessary.
Difference is a good word. It's interesting that you use the word care versus discipline, almost as if they're opposed to each other.
They're not necessarily.
But they're not necessarily opposed. I agree there.
Something that you also were speaking about is like the thinking approach, male-dominated, the feeling approach,
Right.
female-dominated as well. And speaking about, of course, taking a look at the home as well. So how do we, or how would you recommend, what would you say would be the best way to sort of shift and find the way to marry these together? Because many times, I mean, at least from where I sit and what I've seen, there is a great imbalance in that. It's either we have all the way up here thinking and feeling down here, or vice versa.
Yeah.
So how do we start to marry the two and also take into consideration the difference in male and female and the acceptance of that?
So let's clarify those terms. Carl Jung's work around thinking and feeling had to do with decision making. So basically the question that he asked was, well, what do these two beings use more of to make decisions? And he found that about 70% of men tend to be what he called thinking deciders, meaning that they looked at right, wrong, black, white, what's the policy, what's the rule, and very black and white in that way, whereas women tended to lean more towards how are people affected when I make a decision. Feeling decided, 70% of women, those were the numbers. And those numbers tend to still hold. This is not to suggest, and we must say this, that men can't feel and women can't think. Absolutely not. It's just, what is your natural tendency in making a decision? Again, both are necessary. Yeah, I don't know that we need a balance. The marrying is useful. But what I have found is that people tend to get, for want of a better term, demonized.
Yeah.
If you come over as too
Anything.
Either way, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Either way, people tend to get demonized because she is too whatever, or he is, why he's so, you know, why you rough me up like that? And maybe what he did is said, hey, this is what it is, this is the fact, which is natural.
Yeah.
No. When we do work with leaders, one of the things we try to do is to say, okay, you have all these behaviors within you. What is most critical is if you have the ability to select the tool.
Right.
That is most appropriate in the work situation, if we look at the workplace.
I quite like that approach. If we can actually select what is necessary. To use Natasha's wording, marrying doesn't necessarily need balance.
No.
There's a reason that the opposites attract is the term in marriage, because you also want somebody to step in where you may fall short. So perhaps what you're saying, or what I'm hearing at the very least, is that in organizations, yes, we do need both of those dynamics, and we just need to find the way to perfectly marry them.
I think a good way to think about it is this. We have both a left and a right hand, and most of us here will probably be right-handed in the studio. Maybe there's one left-hander looking somewhere around.
Looking.
But I can use my left hand, not as well. So in terms of these behaviors, what I need to do is to, one, be mindful of where I am, what's needed, my tendencies, because I do have a preference, a passion, if you want, for using my right hand. But there are situations where the left is required, and therefore my ability to recognize that and practice the use of the left. This is where the magic is. Because we're born with the range of human behavior sitting within us. We have just trained ourselves, I put that in quotes because the environment does most of that work, to lean one way or the other similarly. Yeah.
You know, listening to you there, one of the things that I really took away from that is we speak about it at an individual level.
Right.
But what about at a business entity level, being able to find that space and also, I mean, just have that genuine concern for individuals?
Yeah. So where I have found or where I've seen organizations do that well is it's not done by accident. It's more institutionalized. The challenge, though, is whose voice is heard. I was just working with an organization last week, and they said in this place, profit rules everything. So you could say what you want. At the end of the day, profit is going to be the thing. Now, profit is important or else we're all in trouble. However, are we taking care of the people? But if we left it for the individuals to decide, then sometimes you run into trouble. Plus, some people don't know what that looks like. They haven't had that experience. You know, if you came up in an organization with a leader who tended to say, hey, we're here to succeed and this is what it is, and your troubles, you know, take it to the Lord in prayer or check it at the door, then you probably are going to show up similarly in the workplace. So institutionalize it. We have to train leaders how to demonstrate those behaviors because they are behaviors. We don't need to talk about whether you want to or not. That's another thing. A lot of times we talk about what do people want to do, and you should want to do it. Why do you need to want to do it? If it's what is required, we do it. If you are aware enough, you can bring that behavior to the workplace. Yeah, you don't have to want to do it. And that raises a whole thought around men and women and how they interact in my head.
People, human beings, point blank period. Because we are definitely talking men versus women in the conversation largely, but the truth is it's part of the human experience. That we do both need to learn how to use our left and our right hands, as you put it, and that marriage is very, very, very important. But as always, we have contextualized things in terms of work and the individual. Let's do it nation now. What does that look like?
Trinidad and Tobago is, in behavioral terms, we're sort of a, let's see, take care of other people and color within the lines society. We're not a hard driving society, and we're certainly not, despite our carnival and all of that, we're not the most friendly of societies, you know, and that shows up in organizations. Now the thing is, that has benefits and challenges. So one of the challenges is that, and we tried it for this constantly, our market size is small, not our market, but the market that we strike out into, because there's a big market out there. Many times we don't strike out because we sort of hold back. Add to that, the society has said to men, and I'm going to get a little controversial, well, dial some of these male-type attitudes back. And I say, well, that's a slippery slope, because if you keep telling men to dial it back, then there's some other things that you lose. You know, if you say dial back your competitiveness and this way that you drive and go hard, then you're also saying don't strike out too far, don't take too many risks. And you need that to grow organizations. You need that to be able to keep this amazing infrastructure running. You need that very male stereotypical type of behavior. Who else is going to do it? No, I think about that. You know, I was invited to speak at a women's forum once, but more than once, but there was this particular time. And people were talking about, you know, the ceilings and so on. And I said, okay, yeah, those are real and they do exist, but let's be fair and honest with ourselves. There are jobs that women could get that they don't want because they're inconvenient. So we can accept that. Who's going to do it? Who keeps, when you plug your phone in, who ensures that there's power coming to that? And when it breaks, who fixes it? It's not that women can't do those things, but that is not an area that is convenient. So we expect men to do it. And therefore, if you ask men to dial back on what is stereotypically male, then what are you also asking them to shave off? And then what do we suffer in organizations, or what do we suffer in the workplace?
And there you have it. Underscoring the critical role of men in modern organizations. That marriage we could continuously talk about, but we will pin for now, as we say thank you very much to Mr. Richard Solomon for joining us this morning, the Managing Director of Development Consulting Center Limited. Now I'm going to give you 30 seconds to look into that camera and tell the men of the world Happy International Men's Day in your way.
I will say this. Men play a critical role in our society and in families. And yes, you know, I've seen people talk about a real man would. You're already a man. You were born that. You embrace who you are and be who you are. Bring that maleness to your world. The world needs the voice. The world needs males and men.
And we take a break here in the now, coming back with more on International Men's Day. Stick around, guys.
I could write, yeah.